God transforms tragedies into victories. We can see many of these things happen in the Bible, and this showcases God's faithfulness and power. So, we will look at 5 stories in the Bible. The first one, we are going to talk about Joseph. We know all about Joseph. He is the brother that got sold into slavery. This was the tragedies. His brothers plotted to kill him, and one brother actually spoke up and was like, "No, we can't kill him." Instead, he plotted to sell him into slavery and just tell their dad that he got eaten by an animal. This is just wow in so many levels. But God, through little things in these tragedies, transform these evil acts into something greater than none of them can even imagine. When Joseph was sold into slavery, I don't know what kind of faith this dude has. I don't know if he complained, but through even slavery, he was faithful to God and he was dedicated into praising and worshiping him. Potiphar was so impressed by Joseph that he actually made him like his personal attendant, and he took care of his household and his property. And of course, when God elevates someone who honors him and wants to walk in his path, he will send all these things to get him back down. And one of these ways was Potiphar's wife. Potiphar's wife was like, "Look at Joseph, he looked good." And she made a move on him, and he rejected her from the embarrassment or whatever. She falsely accuses him of assaulting her. Joseph got thrown into prison. We know that through their fruits will show what is in their hearts. So from the evidence in the Bible, it seems as if Joseph still remained faithful to the Lord. He wasn't complaining in such a crazy way that people around him were like, "Yeah, this dude is just like nothing coming out of him that I want." Okay. But instead, Joseph remained in the light, that even the warden was impressed by him. So he makes Joseph in charge of the other prisoners. God still elevates Joseph even in prison. When Pharaoh had this dream that nobody could interpret, they were just like, "Oh, I remember the baker and oh my gosh, blinking out here. He deciphered my dream. He can interpret yours too." So Pharaoh calls Joseph, and Joseph, of course, being in the Lord's presence and literally asks the Lord what it means. Joseph tells the Pharaoh. And through this faithfulness and trust in the Lord, Pharaoh made Joseph second in command in Egypt. Pharaoh took Joseph's advice to get all the food and stuff in storage and preparation for the famine that's coming. And not only did he help save the livelihood of people in Egypt, they also helped the people around Egypt. And this includes Joseph's own family, which includes his brothers that plotted to kill him and the ones who put him in slavery to begin with. Through these evil acts of people, God turns things around so that his glory is manifested, his glory is shown, his power is shown. And Joseph has such a kind heart that just loves the Lord. He said to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, saving many people." And this leads us to number 2, which is Moses and the Hebrews in slavery in Egypt. So after Joseph dies and then a new Pharaoh comes, the new Pharaoh was just like, "Whoa, there's way too many Hebrews. I'm threatened. Now I'm going to kill all the Hebrew males." So Moses, being a Hebrew male, was hidden by his mom so that he wouldn't be killed. So she hides him for 3 months and then could no longer hide him, puts him in a basket, puts him in the river, which is the story that we all know. But here is the thing. Pharaoh's daughter sees this baby Moses, takes him, adopts him, and then her servant was like, should I get a Hebrew woman to nurse this child? Because, this isn't her real son, so she can't nurse. So this servant gets this Hebrew woman, which is Jochebed, is Moses' mother. How does this happen? God is the answer. He's the one who weaves these little amazing moments into miracles. And if this does not show God's hand in things, I mean, we got to open up our minds more, got to open up the spirit, got to open up the soul and start seeing in the spiritual realm of how God's hand works. So now his mom doesn't have to hide him, doesn't have to worry, doesn't have to have anxiety or fear that they're going to come get the baby and kill him, because no one's going to kill Pharaoh's daughter's adopted son, okay? So Moses becomes this like little stuttering person who cannot speak and is not good at leading. But somehow God uses Moses to lead the people out of Egypt, out of slavery. Through Moses, God shows his power through all these miracles. We know all about the 10 plagues, okay? How amazing is God uses every plague with every Egyptian god to show that their God cannot do nothing, and then him being the true God literally is way more powerful than these fake gods, because frog ain't no good, cow ain't no good. God is the God. And there are other things like, of course, turning the staff into the serpent, the leprosy in the hand, bitter water into sweet water by throwing a rock in there, parting the Red Sea. Can't forget that. This one, which I am so amazed at, is that they beat the Amalekites as long as Moses holds up his staff. So we'll take a look at this faithfulness and dedication of Moses holding his hand for however many hours so that they could win. This shows Moses's trust in the Lord, dedication. Let's go to number 3, which is Ruth and Naomi. So the tragedy is that Naomi's husband and her 2 sons, her 2 married sons, died. Okay, so now these women don't know what to do. They don't have any inheritance. They don't have anything to provide for themselves. So they are in despair, especially Naomi. Her name turned to Mara, which is bitter. But in Indonesian, it literally means angry. Okay, so this name is what she chooses for herself because she's angry, she's bitter, and all of that stuff. Ruth was so devoted to her mother-in-law. She has no husband, she has nothing. This is a Gentile woman. This is a Moabite. They go back to Bethlehem, and Ruth wants to provide for her and her mother-in-law, so she starts working at Boaz's field. Boaz saw Ruth's kindness and dedication and faithfulness that he was drawn to her light, because the light cannot be hidden. So he ends up protecting her and watching over her. And of course, like mother-in-laws do, they kind of swivel into a little their business, right? So she tells Ruth to propose to Boaz. Like, I ain't no proposing to no man. But Ruth literally does that. She asks him to be her kinsman redeemer. I think that's what it's called. But in their legal ways or something back then, there was one right above him. So he goes to him and asks if he wants to marry her and take her hand. And he was like, "Nuh-uh, I don't have time to marry somebody and take of her poor self." Okay. So he says no. So then Boaz married her instead. And this union that the Lord has put together from a Gentile woman and a Hebrew man, they became the grandparents of Obed. And if you know who Obed is, he is the father of Jesse, which is the father of King David. And we know who King David is. But what's amazing to me is that God uses Ruth, a Gentile woman who was not part of the chosen people. And he grafts her into this inheritance that became the lineage of Jesus the Christ. And if you don't know about Job's story, this just reminds me of Job's story about how Job gives inheritance to his daughters in a place where no inheritance were given to daughters. And if you have not watched this video yet, you should. This speaks volumes on God's heart. Now we're going to go into number 4, which is Daniel and the lion's den. Of course, the tragedy is Daniel being in the lion's den, but God is so powerful that he shuts the mouth of the lion, and Daniel was unharmed. But the thing is, Daniel was in the lion's den because he refuses to bow down to the king. The king wants everyone to worship him, but Daniel was like, there is no way I'm gonna worship a man. He knows all about idolatry. He loves the Lord and he trusts in him, that he still walked through this crazy path, and he probably thought he was going to get eaten, but he trusts in the Lord's power that God knows what he's doing, right? The king in the morning was so worried about Daniel because he loves Daniel or honors him so much. And he saw that Daniel was unharmed, and through Daniel's faithfulness, this impresses the king. And the king professes the God of Israel and is just sending out a new decree that's like, oh, all should have fear and reverence for the God of Israel. Ooh, wow. One's faithfulness really affects other people. And this is true for us today. If we are faithful to the Lord in every circumstance, whether it's good or bad, how do you know who is not touched by this light and your obedience? And how do we know if that person said yes to Jesus? The last one, number 5, we are going to take a look at Esther and the Jewish people. So the tragedy is that the Jewish people were going to get annihilated. They're going to get obliterated by Haman and his weird self. Haman, this guy was like offended because Mordecai would not bow down to him. Like, what is this with bowing down to people? Like, this is this like make you feel better or something? Like you're powerful or something like that? Well, he was so offended that Mordecai would not do it. And he was just so enraged at him that he just wants to kill all the Jewish people. And here's the thing, it's so weird to me. Like even the queen at that time could not even speak to her husband without being summoned. So she couldn't just go all up in there and be like, hello, king husband, can you like do this for me? And can I request something from you? She has to be summoned. And if she showed up like the way she did, she could have been killed. But this is what happened. And she was so faithful to the Lord and her people that she risked her life. And because the king loves her so much and sees her kindness and goodness and her just her whole self, and it is because of the Lord, he listened to her and he said yes to have a banquet with her. So in this first banquet, Esther actually invites both Haman and the king, and Haman feels so honored, and he just like boasts about himself and like lifts himself up like most prideful people are, and conceited. You conceited, Haman. And he really wants to kill Mordecai, so he builds this 75-feet gallows to hang him on there. And Haman actually obtains the permission from the king to execute Mordecai. So here is what I'm thinking. I know the Holy Spirit was sent after Jesus, but I just want to say this clearly that God works from the beginning of time until now. And one of those ways is through the Holy Spirit. And who even knows, who can clearly say for sure that it wasn't the Holy Spirit that convicted the king about Mordecai. Somehow he just cannot sleep. And we can know those times when we cannot sleep in the middle of the night. The king has Chronicles read to him, and he realizes that Mordecai was actually the one who saved the king. Mordecai saves the king, so the king wants to honor Mordecai. So he puts a robe over Mordecai, puts him on his horse, and parades him around and gives honor to Mordecai. What does this do to Haman? Of course, it pisses off an arrogant person even more, right? So in the second banquet, Esther was just like, I'm a Jewish woman. So she revealed her identity to the king, and she reveals also Haman's plot to annihilate all the Jews there, including Mordecai. The king is perplexed. He is angry. He leaves the room, and then Haman realizes what he's done, and he begs mercy from Queen Esther. The king comes back and he sees that he misinterprets that whole situation as Haman trying to kill Esther. So what happens? The king ends up using the very device that Haman concocted to kill Mordecai. Amazing how God weaves into these moments of their lives and just turns every evil thing into good. And I'm just so in awe of the Lord's faithfulness to us. He was faithful to them. I know in my life, He's faithful to me all of the time. These 5 examples is just so strong, and I feel like we should hold it in our hearts so that when we go through these things in our lives, we can remember what God has done for them. And it may take time. It took Joseph like years and years and years of being in this oppression and hardship, but God still shows His power through that and is faithful to Joseph. When little things happen in our lives, how fast do we complain? How fast do we blame God hidden in our hearts? But the thing is that God lets us go through these hardships so that He can refine us. He can convict us, and He can make it clear what is truly in our hearts. Are we quick to complain when one little thing happened and curse the name of the Lord? Or do we remain faithful and trust in the Lord even through these little things, so that when the bigger thing happens, are we going to complain, or are we going to continue being in this faithfulness towards the Lord? And we know the book of Revelation is going to happen, is going to happen. Some has happened and it will continue to happen. In this time, it will be the worst of them all. And if we are there during this time, are we going to quickly denounce the name of the Lord, or are we going to keep stepping into this path of faithfulness? So here's my encouragement to you today. Trust in the Lord your God. He is the God who has never changed. He is the same then, He is the same now, and He will be the same forever. Let me know in the comments below how God has turned your tragedies into victories. And do you realize and remember all the little moments that God has put His hand through it all? In hindsight, as it's happening, we don't see these things, right? But when it comes to pass and we look back, we clearly see every moment that God has put His hand on. I know in my life, He has been proved faithful, and I choose to be faithful to Him, and I choose to trust in Him in all parts of my life. And I hope through this video that God's faithfulness is very visible and evident in all parts of your life. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.